Welcome to Dialogues of the Immigrant Village in English. This Friday, October 31st, day of Halloween. And let's start our program of today. In Spanish, we were alive only a few minutes ago, and now we are having the version in English for all those English speakers that are following us or those allies that are following us. Today we'll talk about the SNAP program and the shutdown of the federal government. And therefore, follow us during the next 20 to 30 minutes in English. And if you wanted to listen in Spanish, you can find it already here in Facebook, and during the weekend, Andy Dircio, or sound engineer, will make it available both in English and in Spanish. I am your friend Obed Arango. Let's start. Then let's talk about that the shutdown of the government started on October 1st. It has been almost 1 month since this happened. It has been 1 month since the program stopped. That the shutdown of the government means that the national budget, the federal budget sent by the current president to the Congress, has not been approved. Now, we have to say the things as they are. The Republican Party has the executive, the White House, has the Senate, and has the Congress. And still, they have been unable to approve a budget. Meaning that the proposal is weak because it's affecting big sectors of the country. The Democrats has been saying we are not negotiating with the health and with the food, because the proposal of the current president cuts health assistance, cuts Medicare, cuts Medicaid, brings the premiums of insurance high, and it is estimated that 13 million people will lose the health coverage under the current budget proposal. Democrats are defending that, and that is why they are not approving the current proposal. Therefore, the shutdown of the government, yes, is responsibility of the president and is responsibility of the Republican Party in the Senate and in the Congress. It's important to say the things as they are. Now, we know that the Democrat Congress, the representatives, are in Washington working. But since 7 weeks ago, the Republicans, the representatives of the Republican Party, are practically on vacations. And it seems that they will be on vacations until the month of January. Meaning that it's very possible that the government will be shut down until January, until the time when they will finally sit down to negotiate. The president has been traveling here and there in a grandiloquent discourse, saying that he's making big agreements around the world, but we don't see them. Let me give you just an example. I was just recently in Aldi. The same bag of Colombian coffee that I pay in the month of May, $5.50 the pound, the same pound, today you find it at $9.50. Why? because the tariffs. Now, the current president says that he wants to change the production to the country. But it happens that United States do not produce coffee. United States cannot produce coffee. It's not in the area where coffee can be produced. Therefore, to put a tariff on a product that this country cannot produce, it doesn't seem very smart. Plus, it's very important to know that the tariffs are paid by you and me, are paid by the U.S. consumer. It's not paid by the country of origin. It is paid by you and me. Therefore, every time when you listen that $50 billion were collected in tariffs, are $50 billion that you and me we paid as an extra tax. We are already paying taxes. Now we are paying an extra tax. Having said that, we see an increase of cost in food. We see an increase of cost in things that we need for daily life. We need an increase of cost in clothing. We see increase of cost in everything what we need in a household. All that contributes that the power of our salaries is reduced. Plus that, without the approval of the national budget, we're starting to feel the effects. And I want to talk today about the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, tomorrow, for first time in years, won't be distributed to the 42 million people, 41.7 million individuals that benefits each month from this program. One of the rhetorics that the current administration, that capitalism has made us believe is to criminalize minorities and to criminalize poverty. That is wrong. Poverty cannot be criminalized. It is very important to demystify the myth of meritocracy, that the individual is enough to overcome the situation of poverty. If that will be true, there will not be poverty around the world. But poverty mostly is systemic. Yes, there might be few individuals that here and there are able to move in the social scale through many different factors around them. But the truth that poverty is systemic and it falls into cycles. And most people living in poverty are hard-working people. Also has told us, we had to demystify also. They have told us that minorities, the people of color, were a burden to the system. The criminalization of the minorities, that is also wrong. Let us give and let us analyze some of the real statistics. 41.7 million individuals receive the SNAP benefits, also called the food stamps. These represent 12.3% of the U.S. population and benefits about 22 million households in average. Therefore, tomorrow, 22 million families will be suffering of thinking what we will do this month with the food that the children and teenagers and elderly need. Now, they have made us believe, and we respect every group, we respect every ethnicity, but they have made us believe that it's people of color, that is Afro-Americans and Latinos the group that receive most of this benefit. But in those 42 million people, 35.4% are Anglo-Saxon, are Caucasian, white. The second group is African American with 25.7%, meaning 10% less than the Anglo-Saxon, than the white community. Hispanics is 15.7%, 20% less than the white community. Asian, 3.9%. Native American, 1.3%. Multiple races report, non-Hispanic, 1%. Therefore, what is telling us this? It's telling us this, that in the grand narrative, first is the criminalization of poverty, and second, the criminalization of people of color. But very few times we hear or we listen that the group that benefits the most, of that 41.7 million individuals, is the white community. And nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong is to criminalize the minorities. That is wrong. Therefore, on this program, we are demystifying many of these situations. We cannot criminalize poverty, and we cannot criminalize people of color. The second thing that I would like to mention today is that this benefit means food for kids, means food for teenagers, means food for elderly. That very possible tomorrow, they don't know what they will do in the coming month. There are many ripple effects on this. There are small businesses that receive the food stamps. There are many businesses that receive the stamps and the coupons for other things that are needed in the households. Those small markets, those family shops will feel also the impact, and they will see the reduction of income in coming months. That can have a ripple effect because very possible they will have to close some positions since they will not have the same entrance of financial entrance in the coming months. The SNAP program not only benefited the 40.7 million individuals, but also benefit many small and medium-sized local markets, local stores that contribute to the economy of the towns. This ripple effect will be felt in many states, in all the states of the nation, in the small towns, and in cities. And we can expect that families, businesses, business owners will start to join their voices asking for a solution. Now, let's talk a little bit about history. Because in the midst of all this, there is a rhetoric that criminalizes undocumented immigrants. How many times we have listened the current executive administration and the chief of the staff. I don't want to mention any of those names because are not really worth to mention. But how many times we have listened these people to say that the immigrant community, that the undocumented community is a burden to the state. First, there is no way that we can benefit because these are federal programs. Second, if there is some benefit, it has to do with the citizens born in this country. But let me take you to history about this. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this program, and you will see the parallel with these times. The first version of the SNAP program appeared in 1939, during the time still of the Great Depression, and it was under President Franklin Roosevelt. The program was between 1939 and 1943, and it was created to help farmers with surplus crops, and it was created to feed hungry people in the country. Now, the Great Depression at this moment has been for the last 10 years. And it was during that time that many social programs appeared on this country. It was during that Great Depression that many social programs appeared to benefit not the minorities, not the African American community, not the Latinos, not the Mexicans, not the Asians, but it was mostly to benefit the European immigrants and the Anglo-Saxon, the white citizens. It is important to mention that most of these social programs were not created to benefit minorities. Another important historical fact is that between 1929 to 1939, in the midst of that context, it was what we call the program of repatriation, the mass deportations of Mexican and Mexican American workers that were accused for taking the jobs of the people and that became a burden on the public relief programs. There is no sign that the Mexican and the Mexican American workers were a burden or were benefited for the public relief programs. All those social programs that born during the Great Depression barely benefit minorities. But the scapegoat, it was the Mexican and the Mexican American workers of that generation. A very important data of this, it is estimated that between 1929 to 1939, between 400,000 and 2 million people of Mexican descent were deported to Mexico and were pressured to self-deportation to leave the United States. Do that sound familiar? We are talking about 85 years ago. 85 years ago, the same thing that we are living today happened 85 years ago. 400,000 and 2 million people from Mexican descent were deported or pressured to self-deportation. We are talking between 1929 and 1939. That was called mass deportation and the repatriation campaigns. Another data that is shocking is that 60% of those expelled Mexican descents were U.S.-born citizens, were children and adults born in the United States. Let us remember that the Mexican presence on this country, it was much time before the United States became a country. And it was the scapegoat to blame the Mexican immigrants, the Asian immigrants during the Great Depression for the crisis that this country was having. And 60% of those 2 million people were U.S.-born citizens of Mexican descent. Also, another data, historical data, is that most of the deportations happened with no due process hearings. Many of them were rounded up in raids at workplaces, in public parks, and even in relief offices. The same thing that we are seeing today. It has become not normal, because I don't want to normalize the violence, but when we see today the social media, and we see and we hear that ICE is waiting outside of the courts or the hearing courts to take people, well, that happened under different administration and under different institutions. That happened during the 1920s and 1930s of last century. 100 years later, we are repeating the history. 100 years later, we are repeating the same situation, and we are listening the same rhetoric of blaming the minorities and blaming the foreigners, as they call us, and blaming the descendants of the Mexican descent as guilty of the crisis that we have. But don't believe it. It's not. Because at the same time that we see that the government is not approving, because they want to affect the health and the food and the benefits to minorities and the benefit to people who is in poverty. At the same time, we see that they approved $37 billion to ICE, to this military police in the United States. It is important to mention that the cost of ICE, that the budget that ICE has, is bigger than the army of Israel and the army of Italy. How is possible that the internal police of this country has more budget than full armies of other countries? The only explanation that this has is that this is a militarized police for social control of the same population. And the concerning of that is when you act like that, is clearly a fascist initiative. It's clearly a fascist initiative of control, of absolute control inside, when you have funded a militarized police. We have seen the actions during the last few weeks that the actions of ICE, it goes merciless against families, against parents, against workers, against men and women. And lately we have heard also that they have been picking some teenagers. We had a case here. I was informed of a case here where a father was picked up with a son and with a nephew, and both of them were minors. Therefore, at this moment, we are starting to see things that we should not see, to see things that should not happen in a nation that call themselves democrat, a democratic nation, where democracy is the living, I will say, position. I don't think so. And I have to remind you that in the interview that I made to Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, if you can listen that chapter that was about a month and a half ago, when I asked her, is the democracy of the United States at risk? Her answer was yes of it. The democracy in the United States today is at risk. These signs are very clear. Criminalize poor, criminalize minorities, increase budget for military police, for a militarized police, for social control, reduce budget for social programs. Many of these are signs of increasing fascism. And today I want to speak about the elections in Argentina, but that will be in another time, in another day, because we'll talk about what is happening around the world too, with the intervention of the United States. Having said that, it's very important today that we review how it's affecting the shutdown of the government, how it's affecting this the minorities, how it's affecting this 42 million people in this country, how it's affecting more than 20 million of families, how this is affecting children and teenagers, and how this is a repetition of history. The SNAP program has had many versions through the years. In 1961, under John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, the food stamp program started in 1961. 1970s had a big expansion from 1970s to 1990s. It was expanded nationwide and also started to receive electronic benefit transfer. And in the 2008, during the Great Recession, we might remember the Great Recession, when we had house foreclosures and when many people lose their businesses and their jobs and their houses, there was an expansion on the SNAP program, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, called today SNAP. Today, it's easy to blame it on poor people and to blame it on minorities, the reduction of these social programs. We cannot allow the criminalization of poverty, and we cannot allow the criminalization of the minorities. If you are a family that do not need a SNAP program, good for you. You are in the privilege. But if you are a family that, even working hard, you are in the SNAP program, well, we cannot accept the criminalization of the situation where millions of families are, in which depends children and teenagers. We are against that criminalization, and we are against the rhetoric that show or present as a burden to the nation. In a nation that presumes that democracy is the law of the land, no one is a burden. No one is a burden. But it's walking together and working together. Having said that, I wanted today to address that. And I just want to tell you that next week we are having here in the podcast on Monday Senator Amanda Capaletti. She will be visiting us, and we'll have 1 hour of conversation with her, and we'll talk about many different topics at the state level and how the shutdown of the government is already affecting state programs. And in the same week, next Friday, we are having the visit of Representative Greg Scott and State Representative Greg Scott, and we'll continue the conversation with him. Then for next week, it will be a very active week here in Rebarte Podcast, in Villa Inmigrante, in Dialogues of the Villa Inmigrante. And until the next time, I wish you to have a safe Halloween. I wish you to celebrate with your families, to have some time also to celebrate together, despite the bad news that we have all these days. It's important as families to continue finding joy. Be safe, take care of your neighbor as yourself. From the city of the fraternity, desde la ciudad de la fraternidad, Philadelphia, this was your friend Obed Arango. Until the next time.